Hey friends, welcome back to the Special Kind of Motherhood podcast. If you have been wanting to get started gardening, but you honestly feel like you don't have a lot of time to do it, then today I want to share with you one of my favorite ways to continue to grow food while also saving time. So let's go ahead and get started.
Hi friend, do you dream of having a garden but you don't know where to start? Do you want to switch to more natural products but feel overwhelmed by all the options? Do you believe that a holistic lifestyle would help your special needs kiddo but you're daunted by all the information out there? Welcome to the Special Kind of Motherhood podcast, where you will learn how to work towards your dream for homesteading, gardening, and holistic living in small, simple steps that won't overwhelm you. Hi, I'm Ashley. I'm a wife, Jesus follower, and mom to some amazing kids. As some of my kids began experiencing health struggles and developmental delays, I decided it was time to switch to a holistic lifestyle. I quickly became stressed out and burnt out, feeling like I needed to change everything at once. I finally realized that I had to start making one small change at a time, then build from there. I learned to walk this holistic journey in a way that works for me and my family, without stress or overwhelm or constantly feeling like I wasn't doing enough. If you're ready to hear from another mama who understands what it's like to have no time and who can help you make changes towards better health for your family in a way that works for your specific life, then this is the podcast for you. Pop in your earbuds, reheat your coffee for the third time, and let's do this.
Like so many of you, I'm a super busy mom. I have 4 kids, I have a lot going on, and I have this strong desire to garden. I want to be able to grow healthy food for my family, but it does sometimes feel like I just don't have the time to keep up with all of it. And for that reason, this year, a big focus for me has been trying to plant as many perennial vegetables and herbs as possible. And what I have really been working on, I've been doing it, I guess I would say, for the last couple of years. And I think that's why it's become such a large focus for me this year, is because as I've been slowly planting perennials over the years, I've come to realize that it is a great way to save time and effort while also still growing food. And I want to share with you today why that is. But I also just wanted you to know that this is something that has kind of evolved for me over the years of really beginning to understand the value of growing perennial vegetables and fruits in the area of being a busy mom and feeling like you don't have enough time, and how can we make gardening as effortless as possible. And in my opinion, really investing in perennials is a great way to do that. One thing that I will say with perennial gardening is that you do often have to wait for a harvest, and that is something you have to consider. But I think that just planting once and then being able to continue reaping the benefits of that is extremely helpful. So in my opinion, having to wait maybe a year or 2 years for a harvest while I'm basically having to do very little, maybe a little bit of maintenance in between, it's worth it to me because I'm able to just plant once and then just maintain and move forward from there. Let's talk a little bit about what a perennial is. And it is basically just a plant that is going to last longer than 2 years. Now, it might die back in the winter and then come back in the spring, but you're not going to have to replant it. So that is a perennial. Now, there are some annuals that have a tendency to reseed. So think of things like basil. I have basil that I made my basil tower last year, and it went to seed and it reseeded, and there's basil all over the place. Now, some people will say that basil can be a perennial in certain zones, but it is not in my zone. However, it's not a perennial in my zone, but it did reseed itself. And that is a great thing as well, but it's not the same thing as a perennial, which is the same plant that is just coming back every single year and continuing to produce year after year. What I really like about perennials is the fact that I'm not having to worry about starting seeds in order to get a harvest. I am also not having to plan out each year, where am I going to plant this thing, where am I going to plant that, and then going and actually doing the planting, tending to the plant, making sure that it's going to actually survive from the seedling stage and grow up to maturity to get a harvest. I just get to plant it once, and then it typically will do its own thing, which is really nice. And of course, perennials, you can plant them and then they can die too. And they are going to need fertilized and cared for. So I'm not saying it's completely hands-off or that it's also not without risk. But my experience has been that once you can get a perennial going, it's just really, really helpful to have that steady repeat producer of some kind of harvest for you. I really do like that. Kind of the way I've described it to myself anyways, is that whenever I plant a perennial and then I see it come back the next year, it honestly feels like I've just given a gift to myself because it is one less area that I have to worry about planting out. It's one less thing that I have to wonder, oh, am I going to get a harvest? Do I want to plant this? It's just, there's less thought in planning in general involved. And for me, that just feels like a gift to myself. So let's talk about different options. And I do want to say you're going to have to look at your growing zone for this. I will tell you some things that are considered to be perennials, but it absolutely depends on your gardening growing zone. So just look up what growing zone you're in for your zip code, and you'll be able to figure that out. And then you can determine from there if these plants are actually a perennial in your gardening zone. And the reason why I mention this is because it really can fluctuate based off of your growing area. So for instance, I love lantana. It's a flower. It is not a vegetable, but I think it's a beautiful flower. In my growing zone, it is not a perennial, but south of me, it is actually a perennial. And so you really do have to look and figure out what is going to be a perennial for your area. And I also want to say that there are times when you might be able to take a risk and see, maybe it's close, like you're in zone 4 and it says it's a perennial up to zone 5. Well, you might just try it and see if it works for your zone, because there are things such as, they're called microclimates, which basically just means it's a small area with a little bit of a different climate compared to the surrounding area. And things that can affect this can be things like hills and mountains and roadways and being close to buildings or being close to bodies of water. So it is possible at times that you might go on Google and see, oh, it won't be a perennial for this area, but it might work in your area, just depending on what kind of microclimate you have in that growing area. All right, I want to start with herbs, and some herbs that are considered perennials are thyme. And I'm going to give you a range of what zones are considered to be perennials in. But I do want to tell you that this range, it varied pretty broadly. I looked in multiple different sources, and not all of them gave the same range. So please take this with a grain of salt. But for thyme, it says it will be a perennial in zones 5 through 9. Chives are another one, which are perennial in zones 3 through 9. Rosemary, and it says it's 8 and above, but I also saw where potentially in zone 7 or even 6B, rosemary can be a perennial. German chamomile is considered a perennial in zones 5 to 8. Oregano is zones 5 to 10. Echinacea would actually be zones 3 to 8, or I also saw up to zone 10. So just kind of some mixed results on that. Sage is another one, and it is perennial in zones 5 to 9. And then English lavender is zones 5 to 8. Lemon balm is in the mint family. It is relatively hard to kill, but it is considered a perennial in zones 4 to 9 and potentially even lower than that. Yarrow is another perennial herb, which is considered in zones 3 to 9. Mint, again, it's very hard to kill, and it says zones 4 to 9, but it depends on the type of mint. Of course, you have spearmint, peppermint, chocolate mint, orange mint. I think there's pineapple mint. So it really does depend on the specific mint you are planting, but in general, it was zones 4 to 9. And then comfrey in zones 3 through 8. So those are some different herbs that give you kind of an idea of what you could potentially plant as a perennial herb. Again, I've said before, herbs are a great way. They don't take up a ton of space unless you're planting like lemon balm or mint, which are going to go everywhere. But they can save you a lot of money in not having to buy fresh herbs from the store. Okay, let's talk about some vegetables. So asparagus is considered a perennial. Now, it does take a while to get started and to actually produce, but it can actually produce for up to 15 to 20 years after it gets started and begins to produce. Rhubarb is another one that can be considered a perennial. Jerusalem artichoke is another one. And then berry bushes. So we're talking blackberries, raspberries, strawberries. All of those are perennials. Again, you're going to have to look at your zone, but for the most part, those are going to be a good perennial. I love having berry bushes, and I have strawberry plants. It was a big focus for me this year, and I'm really glad that I went ahead and invested that time and money in order to just get a good harvest of berry bushes going. And then you're going to have different things like fruit and nut trees as well. So a variety of nuts, and then different fruits like peaches, pears, apples, plums. You can even get grapevines, nectarines, cherries, figs. The thing with the fruit and nuts trees are that they are going to take a while to produce. It really does depend on the variety you're getting, but you're looking at more of a long-term investment. In my opinion, though, still worth it. Go ahead and get them planted, get them growing, so that when the time comes and they begin to actually produce, like I said, it's going to feel like a gift to yourself. And the fact you're going to be glad that you went ahead and invested that time and the resources to get those going and growing so that they can begin to produce with very little work from you. So I hope this was helpful. I would love to hear from you. What is your favorite perennial to plant? It could be a vegetable or a flower. I love planting perennial flowers as well because of the same thing. I enjoy the beauty of the flowers and not having to go through and replant beds, but just having the flowers pop up. It is just a great gift to myself. So come join us in our free Facebook community and share with us what your favorite perennial is. You can find us at bit.ly/motherhoodcommunity, or I will have the link down in the show notes below. I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I'll see you back next time.
Hey Mama, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, would you take 30 seconds to share this with a friend who is wanting to live more holistically without the overwhelm? Also, don't forget to head over to Apple Podcasts to leave me a review. It blesses and encourages me to know that this show is helping you. All right, friends, it's time for me to go work in the garden and make some homemade bone broth. I will see you back next week.